Well, welcome all. We're ready to start our 164th meeting. And as always, we'll start with the roll call.
Okay, Bob Guy.
Here.
Nick Aldrich.
Here.
Michael Devonshire is absent. Jay Lorenzo.
Here.
J.G. Lorenzo, sorry. Kristen Herron.
Here.
Doug Pirelli is sick. Daryl Andrade is here. Paul Stewart absent. Chuck Vandry absent. Lucy Walensky absent. Jen Lamack absent. Wayne Goodman.
Here.
Jake Schneider.
Here.
Okay, so we have just 7. You're a quorum. Don't anybody go to the bathroom till the kids are done. So, now you have to.
And now we
I
have
might say this is rather unusual for the new members. We
Yeah.
usually have a very full complement here because it's exciting stuff, so don't be disappointed.
Well, we just want you to know how essential you are.
and now we'll have the call for the approval of our June minutes.
I move the approval.
Whit moves it, and Jay seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
And I would like to welcome our new board members, and we have 3 today. This is terrific. First, Wayne Goodman, the Executive Director of the Landmark Society of Western New York. And welcome, Wayne, and we salute you for your organization's wonderful work across the state and with the successful conference last month. It was a terrific effort. And Ron Peister has retired, and he is being replaced by Daryl Andreas, who is Senior Building Construction Engineer for the Department of State. And Daryl, welcome. And we also have, all the way from Buffalo, Jake Schneider, who is both an architect and a developer. He's done some wonderful projects in Buffalo and has tax credit experience, and we are particularly happy to see that and to welcome you, Jake. And we will not always be meeting here. We move around, and we'll actually try to get closer to Buffalo for one of these meetings in the next year or 2. And so now we move to the first of our reports, and we did minutes. Yeah, we approved minutes. And Andy, welcome aboard, executive deputy commissioner for Parks, and is here to tell us that all is well, I hope.
Yeah, I just have a very brief update. Really, 2 items. I mean, one was just a good example of a partnership effort between our agency and others and some of the preservation groups. The legislative session ended last week. There wasn't a lot on the agenda that was related to historic preservation, but there was a bill that started to get traction, not specifically about historic preservation, but that it was intended to extend prevailing wage requirements to additional kinds of projects where there's public or state funding, which, although not explicitly stating such, appear to would have applied to both potentially tax credit projects, where they would have been required to pay prevailing wage, and would have also potentially applied almost certainly to historic preservation grants that we administer to nonprofits. Those projects would become subject to prevailing wage, and certainly we understand the interest behind prevailing wage, but it would have a huge impact on viability of projects. And I know the Preservation League weighed in and did a lot of outreach to the legislature. Our group sort of gave it all to me, and we communicated internally with the executive branch, and the bill did not it did not pass in either house. It was actually got to the floor of the Senate and got pulled back, actually. Sort of unusual parliamentary movement in the legislature. So good for the Preservation League and others who maybe are involved. It's good to stay vigilant and show how important that is. The other thing I was just going to say, in the past I've reported on our progress of our capital program. Last year the governor formalized that by releasing a plan called New York Parks 2020. And the goal of essentially is, there's actually a small report that's available on our website, but the central component of it is a commitment by the governor to invest $900 million in rehabilitating, improving our state parks and the state historic sites for the 7-year period that started in 2013 and ends in 2019. And that's been backed up every year by appropriation in the budget. We got another $90 million this year along. So the centerpiece of that $900 million is state appropriations, totaling about $650 million over that period. And then we've committed to securing at least $250 million from other funding sources to leverage that. Quite frankly, we're well along the way. We're north of the $550 million mark now in terms of project commitments. And we're year 4 of 7, and we're going to, quite frankly, at some point there'll be an announcement that $900 million exceeded $1 billion, which will be great. The really nice thing is it's really, halfway through the initiative, it's really starting to show. We had a remarkable, at least remarkable for us, in the last several weeks. Governor Cuomo visited 3 state parks: Jones Beach, Walkway over the Hudson State Historic Park, and Niagara Falls State Park, all of which obviously, all those state parks have an immense amount of historic importance and infrastructure and buildings and facilities and landscapes. And it was kind of the same event times 3, which the governor came and sort of toured work that has been done now in the parks, construction sites that are underway, and then unveiled and announced, designs and renderings of the next round of projects that are about to be bid. And in all 3 of those parks, at Jones Beach, obviously the Walkway, at Niagara Falls, we've kind of hit that critical mass now where you can really see and feel on the ground the impact of what for our agency is a record level of sustained funding, capital funding, really in decades. And so I know, again, there have been some of the groups here have been advocates for that, but it's a tremendous success story. And the bulk of the funding has been certainly focused on our larger parks that have these huge backlogs of needs, but there's also been a number of state historic site projects that have either been completed or being teed up. So it's just a very, very positive time for the agency to see all that happen. So that's my report.
Thank you, Andy, that's great. And Ruth?
Mr. Chairman, would it be appropriate for the board to pass a resolution of acknowledgement and thanks to the governor, or is that something that, since we're a creature of the governor, we shouldn't be doing it? I don't know, but it's pretty exciting. I mean, this is unprecedented, really.
I don't see why not.
I think it would be perfectly appropriate. You're not really a creature of the governor. It's just, I wouldn't describe you that way, Wayne. This board has it is appointed by the governor, confirmed by the Senate, and has a self-standing authority beyond any other entity. But I think it would be great, and we could probably help do a little drafting that would help both acknowledging that and encouraging the governor to continue forward and complete, including next year's budget, the annual appropriations, and see the effort through. That would be great.
Well, let's consider that then. We're going to leave the drafting to Wint and staff, but we have, I think, enough of an idea of what this is going to say to vote on it.
Yeah, the next board meeting would be appropriate because, that's the beginning of the state budgeting season, and, it could also just, I'm not advising you what to say, but it could certainly talk about the 17-18 budget and so forth.
I think we could do it now.
Okay.
We have to wait till the next meeting. So Wynn has made a motion. If someone would like to second that motion, Jay seconds it. All in favor?
All right.
And we will get on to the drafting. A good thought.
Did we do it? Thank you, Randy.
I don't think we have. Why don't we go with your report?
Okay, so I wanted to bring everybody up to date on our 50th anniversary activities. Our commemorative plans are being distributed and are highly successful, which is great. We have all 3 videos that are ready and available now, and links have been sent to our colleague organizations, to the National Trust for Historic Preservation, to the National Park Service, to NYSHBO, who sent that out on their listserv. It's on our agency's YouTube channel. They are on our agency's YouTube channel. And we're also doing a social media push by the agency. And the videos aren't on the website yet, but that is still to come. And we're also sending them out to the historic preservation programs, the schools around the state. And the Albany County Visitor Center is pushing the Underground Railroad video. So that's going along very well. We are in the process now of getting together the contract for hiring for 3 more. So we'll have 3 more before the end of the year, we hope. Our conference was a huge success. We had over 300 attendees, a wide range of educational programs, and a lot of time to network, which is what people like. Thanks primarily to the Landmark Society of Western New York, but also partners with the Preservation League, Historic Albany, and our office. We were able to do it in 2 locations, which was very tricky, but very successful. Part of it was in Albany, part of it in Troy. What we're looking at for next year is the Landmark Society, which of course is located in Rochester. We'll having it in Rochester next year, but we're looking at doing it every other year in Albany, which for the schedule, the next one being in Albany in 2018 is a perfect time for us to have people here to advocate for continuation, extension of the state tax credit program, which is due to sunset in 2019. So that should work out really well. We have a new exhibit at Fort Ontario that's a great success, thanks to technology and iPads and all sorts of modern inventions. It's made it possible to display and provide more access to a number of artifacts. And the stories that are told through the exhibit are told on a personal level to a great deal too, which I think is very interesting to people. So we had the ribbon cutting for that several weeks ago, and it's a big success. Olana's 50th anniversary of being a state-owned historic site is being celebrated next Monday, and that's a big event too. And the other thing I thought I should mention is, which some of you may have seen in the papers, was the reburial of the remains of African American slaves that were discovered in digging up the Schuyler Flats site for a sewer project many years ago, and the remains have been at the State Museum. And there was a project that our Cordell Reeves was very heavily involved in to have them laid out in state at Schuyler Mansion last Friday, and then reburied at Albany Rural Cemetery, or no, St. Agnes, excuse me, St. Agnes. And it was a very touching and moving thing, and I think was really terrific. And then, last but not least, staffing. I think most of you know Michael Lynch, our new Director of Historic Preservation. He started 6 weeks ago, was it? So we're very pleased with that. We also have a new office manager that you'll see coming in and out, and Secretary Debbie Macy left, she retired, and Michelle Weigert has taken her place. Jocelyn Ferguson is a new archaeologist that you'll come across at some point. And that's the good news. The bad news is Audrey Neeson is retiring. Actually, her last day is tomorrow. So we will miss her. She's been here for over 30 years, so it's a loss, but this is what happens. And I think that's it. Any other questions?
Can I add one more thing I was going to mention, because you maybe start to hear about this in the coming year. So another piece of legislation the governor signed last fall was creating a women's suffrage commission to celebrate the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage, which is actually going to be celebrated in New York from 2017 through 2019. I guess if I have this right, yeah, obviously, right in 1919 was the year universal suffrage was adopted nationally for the United States. And 1917 in New York, and obviously New York played a leadership role in the national movement as well, dating back to the 1800s, obviously. So, and the good news is a commission is being established. It's still in formation, but we and others advocated that we need some money to make something happen. So there was $500,000 adopted in the budget to support the activities of the commission. Part of my education has been that, interestingly, our state historic site system has relatively little connection with suffrage. So I think our agency's participation is not going, there may be some things and activities certainly that happen at state historic sites, but our participation will be more supporting the work of other groups, the State Museum, obviously, the Seneca Falls, the Park Service facility. There are a lot of other programming that's underway that you'll see more and more activity, I think, in the coming 12 months.
That was one of the things that we discussed at a meeting regarding the conference next year, which is in Rochester, and the real Susan B. Anthony house is in Rochester, not the fake one.
Yeah, right.
So that might be a great place to highlight it.
Yeah.
Kath, do you have anything to say about the venues for future meetings?
We talked about, we usually go on leave in September, and Ruth and I talked about perhaps going to Phillips Manor again. They're having some kind of a new
They have
exhibit.
a new exhibit. Actually, Chris Flagg also suggested Sonnenberg.
Oh,
Which
Sonnenberg.
we haven't been to ever.
Hopefully the gate will be open. Yeah.
So that's
I don't know, I think we need to put a little bit of thought into that, but those are.
Do you have a date?
The date is the 22nd again. September 22nd, sorry.
Every meeting is on the 22nd from now to eternity.
No, not December is the 8th. So I guess we'll get a little bit more definitive information about that and get that to you. But those are the two possibilities. Yeah, Sonnenberg would also be very nice in the fall. I know we've been to Phillips Manor a few years ago, but they do have something new that has to do with refugees that takes into consideration the current crisis. So it's very timely. So we thought that would be an interesting thing for everyone to see. Plus, we have a lot of new members who haven't been there.
Very good. Well, we have quite an agenda today, so I think it's time to begin our register reviews.
So just to tell, that for the new members, we're going to be going a little bit faster than we normally would. So hold your hand up if you're going too fast. But
Set to begin. Okay.
I'm going to be presenting the Prospect Hill Historic District, which...
Would you introduce yourself since we have new...
Oh, yeah, I'm Dan McEnany. I'm in the outreach unit in the office. I was formerly with the National Register program out in Buffalo and New York City for a long time, so this is sort of a brief cameo for me just to present this project, which has been kicking around in our office for quite some time. Some people may be more familiar with the name of this project, calling it the Peace Bridge neighborhood, and the Peace Bridge project out in Buffalo. This has been with our office for a very, very long time, for not just myself, but many of my colleagues, especially in other state agencies. But importantly, I want to talk about today how this has been with the people of Buffalo for a very, very long time. It's quite a thesis on land use planning and traffic planning. The neighborhood developed like a lot of Buffalo neighborhoods. It's kind of an offshoot of the Olmsted Parks and Parkways system. On the western side, the Parkway system came along and developed over here, which was the front, which overlooked the Niagara River and Lake Erie. So our neighborhood looks right about at this area right here. So it begins development coinciding with the development of the park in the 1870s. We have a longer period of significance that goes up into the 1950s, and I'll explain that in just a moment. In the 1920s, actually as early as 1850, there was a discussion of opening up an international bridge to Canada and identified as a priority that was very unfeasible. So it wasn't until the 1920s where this really got underway to develop the Peace Bridge and its construction. The Peace Bridge required that a lot of the front itself was lost in this area to create that area. Because it's an international plaza, its continued growth right up in the 1950s, introductions of highways, reduced the front significantly down to about 20 acres, also stripping it of much of its picturesque character. So that what was once the most highly trafficked park in Buffalo was reduced down to what it is today, which is still used but significantly different from what Olmsted had intended. In 1997 was the very controversial proposal to twin the bridges, and one of the early discussions was demolishing about 88 houses within this area through here. It's been an ongoing 106 project with us, with partners at Federal Highway, local partners, New York State DOT, and of course the Peace Bridge Authority. This brought a lot of attention to Buffalo. It brought a lot of attention to preservation in the city. Sparked an enormous discussion. The interest of the National Trust came in, and I think, in my opinion, it was a big motivator to bring the 2011 conference to the city. In 2008, it was listed as one of the 11 most endangered places in the nation. Also, one of the 7 most endangered through the Preservation League. Since that time, discussions about the Peace Bridge are always ongoing. Both in the review of our office, we identified this historic district a long time ago in 1997. Actually, I think it was a little later than that, as the process was moving on. But we never moved forward with listing because it was pretty active. Boundaries were changing, lots of discussions. This has been surveyed no less than 4 times by architectural historians. So the road to get to an actual designation has been very, very long, and an enormous amount of credit goes to the Prospect Hill Neighborhood Alliance, and especially Kathy Mecca, who's stayed with this, and not just concerns about historic preservation, but environmental concerns. The district was, the actual preparation of the district nomination was sponsored by the Preservation League through the Preserve New York grant. The current status of the project is that it's ongoing with much less threat to actual buildings. The Episcopal Church home was demolished a year ago. There is a chapel that is outside the historic district that remains individually eligible. We have the blessing of this project with New York State DOT and the Peace Bridge Authority. And we recently, since you've seen the nomination, have received a letter of support from the National Trust.
Dan, would the church home have been in the district at any
No.
time?
No, it would not have been. At the time, we had identified the district, and even looking at the expansion would have been a bit of a jump, including the church, which are not substantially contiguous to the current district.
Thank you.
So some views here. These houses from the 1950s appeared when there were subsequent transportation enhancements along Front Park, sort of changing it. So this last wave of development of homes from the 50s sort of concludes the period of significance. But otherwise, an absolutely lovely and intact, very typical Buffalo neighborhood.
If there are no further questions, Jake, would you like to move this neighborhood?
Certainly.
We have a motion, and we have a second. Jake seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Good morning. My name is Bill Krattinger. My National Register territory is sort of the eastern spine of New York from Rockland and Westchester County to the Canadian border. It's more or less it. I want to start with the Newton Tabor Marvin Farm in the town of Nassau, Rensselaer County, being nominated in the areas of agriculture and architecture. History of continuous agricultural activity here from at least the 1780s, if not earlier. The advertisement there is from a Springfield, Massachusetts newspaper. Abner Newton was the first identified owner of this farmstead. In the 1790s, he was marketing it for sale in Massachusetts. No takers because really a lot of the New England folks weren't too keen on the idea of buying leased land. We see the house. It's obviously evolved since the first time it was photographed. In essence, just a small story-and-a-half vernacular building, probably built in the early 19th century. But really the keynote feature of this farmstead and sort of the central artifact is a pretty remarkable early English barn Scribal English barn, 40 by 45 building, obviously used for wheat threshing, and so sort of a salient link to the earliest history of this property. As it turns out, we found out subsequently that some of the other buildings that were on adjacent farmstead, which were probably part of Newton's property, were actually moved and dismantled, and they're at Old Austerlitz Village. So that's where some of the other buildings probably of Newton vintage. Characteristic collection of buildings: the house, the English barn, granary, corn crib, tractor shed, and so on and so forth. As portrayed in the nomination, it was indicated we were nominating 40 acres. We've subsequently amended that. The family who owns the farm now has bought back 55 acres of historically associated land that was part of the Newton holding and which is still used for agricultural purposes, including haying and sugaring. So that is the Newton Tabor Marvin farm.
Are there any buildings on other than 55 acres?
No, it's vacant, so, but the fact it's still used in an agricultural capacity and has integrity to that aspect, we thought it should be, absolutely should be included.
Jerry, would you like to make the motion? Sure. Okay. Jerry seconds, all in favor?
Ankrum in southeastern Columbia County. We are nominating Hamlet here, the Ankrum Hamlet Historic District. Not quite as long a history as Dan's district, but this does represent about 3 or 4 years of concerted efforts there between our office, the Ankrum historian Clara Van Tassel, and the consultant Ruth Pawanka, sort of the Columbia County historian extraordinaire. Ankrum has a very long and storied history dating back to the 1740s. It was the site of an early Livingston house, as well as the oldest iron furnace established in the state of New York. But a lot of what we see today and what remains is really from the second and third quarter of the 19th century and represents both the iron business as well as the later milling of paper mill, which followed that earlier use. So what we see are, in essence, really vernacular buildings, Greek Revival style, very modest, story and a half, sometimes just gable-ended or upright and wing. This is one of my favorite survivals of a bridge, and I don't know if John was involved in this, but somehow DOT was convinced to retain the original stone arch bridge, and basically it is in situ beneath the existing bridge, so sort of an unusual artifact. Just a few characteristic buildings, moving clockwise from the upper left. General Store, Simon's General Store, built about 1873. Italian commercial building that is listed on the register. District School 10. Bottom right, sort of the tail end of development, a circa 1930 craftsman house. And in the lower left, the Grange, which was established in the late 1920s, which now functions as an opera house. And also Union Cemetery, the current post office, and the Methodist Church. So it has been a long time in the works. I think it's a good district, and we have strong support, not a single objection, I am pleased to report. And also the previously listed Lutheran Church, St. John's Lutheran Church.
A few years ago, that factory was manufacturing Kleenex. It seemed unusual.
Well, it's remarkable.
Iron foundry, but
well, it's remarkable, and that site has been used continuously for industrial endeavors since the 1740s. It's pretty remarkable. Right on the, what's the role of Jansen Hill, or what they call the Rojan.
good district.
Who's interested? You want to say? All in favor?
Okay, moving out into the hill towns, the Helderbergs, building I've known for a long time, and we're glad we finally had the opportunity to nominate. St. Paul's Lutheran Church in Bern, sort of a central institution in the life of Bern. It's being nominated in the area of architecture as well as social history for its connections with the anti-rent agitations of the 1840s. This building served as the meeting place for the first anti-rent state convention in January 1845, so it's very important. Social connection. An outstanding example, sort of a transitional federal Greek Revival style meeting house. Brick masonry construction was certainly new out there in that part of the world. This area had been settled mostly by Palatine Germans, but by the early 19th century, the ethnic and cultural complexion had begun to change. Still reads in large measure on the exterior as the 1835 building with some changes. Modifications were made to the sanctuary and other parts of the building in the late 19th and early 20th century. Still basic spatial intent is still interpretable, and a lot of the first generation Greek revival woodwork still survives as well. And that is the Lutheran Church in Durham.
Everybody makes the motion. Do we have a second? 3 seconds on favor?
Aye.
Okay, and finally, moving up into Saratoga County to the town of Ballston, hamlet of Burnt Hills, we have Calvary Episcopal Church, which was first constructed and used in 1849. It's a sort of unusual story in that this parish was established in large measure to serve a new influx of English mill hands who had come to work in a paper mill, basically a wallpaper mill. Reverend Edward Davis was a central figure here, basically worked with no financial compensation for 6 years, gave money for the construction of the rectory, gave land, and was really heavily invested in the building. Transepts were added in the 1850s. You've read the narrative. There was a pretty significant fire that occurred here in 1966. In the building, after really very short deliberation, they decided to restore the building as best they could and expand it. Our period of significance ends with 1966, with basically the work to bring it back to what it was before the fire, but it excludes some of the later additions. In terms of the larger context of Borden, Batten, Gothic Revival churches, certainly if this society does date to 1849, as we believe, it is right there with some of the earliest examples by Upjohn and others. So a pretty important example of the Gothic idiom in rural Saratoga County. Rectory upper right, parish hall on the left slide, on the right side of the left slide. And some views of the interior of the church, very simple. Really, the chancel was in essence contained within the main block of the building itself. So it satisfied some mandates of the ecclesiological movement and failed in other regards. And that is Calvary Episcopal Church.
I will move it, and Kristen's going to second. All in favor?
Aye.
Great, thank you.
Hello, my name is Emily Gould. I'm the National Registered Representative for the Mohawk Valley, all the way north to now Franklin County. So I have a fairly large and diffuse territory to work with. But for this nomination, I went down into Delaware County, and this is a nomination of the Second Walton Armory, which was occupied by the 33rd separate company. And it is in Walton, Delaware County. It is the armory for the county. The nomination is driven by commercial tax credits. The owner of the property, Mustafa Saab, is running a restaurant there now and is hoping to turn it into a destination wedding facility. And he has a beautiful building with lots of original detail in it, and has been very thoughtful about what he's done so far. So this is part of an Army National Guard armories in New York State multiple property listing, and it meets the criteria for significance laid out in the documentation. It's locally significant under 2 criteria. Criteria A for military history, and also for recreation and culture, because most of these armories were used as clubhouses as well as places for the military, the National Guard to drill. And it's also significant under criterion C for architecture. You can see here the administration building. Almost all armories consist of 2 parts: an administration building in the front and a drill hall in the back. So you can see on the left the administration building, which faces Stockton Avenue, and below you see the view back from the drill hall towards the turrets in the front of the building. And another element about this building, which is quite interesting, is it is built right next door to the first Walton Armory, which was nationally registered, listed in, I think, in 2003. So this is, if you look at this picture again, the building in question is on the right, next to the bridge. The building on the left is the first armory, and it's already listed as an armory and grading hall. So this is Isaac Perry, who's the architect of so many of these wonderful armories upstate New York. He did almost 30 of them, 19 of them survived. This is our armory in Walton. Looks very much like armories throughout the state, but probably most like one in Amsterdam. Perry is on the right. He was the state architect for a period of about 10 years. And during that period, there was a lot of economic vitality, and so people were investing in the infrastructure of their communities. And in this particular case, Walton got not just one armory, the first one had been built in the 1880s, but it got a second armory in the 1890s. The image on the left is the view from the armory at the village, the town of Walton. And the view today, very similar, still a wonderful rural setting for this rather magnificent building. You can go up in the tower. They have these wonderful tower rooms, which are used for the military as their kind of offices, but also as club rooms down on the first floor. And when you get up to the top, you have this view of the rifle slits, and the graffiti on the lower right is from the tower. I guess you'd say door, and people went up there in the National Guard and would carve their names, and you could see dates from not the 2015s, but from the 1915s. And on the bottom left is the magazine that was used for storing ammunition. The most beautiful space in the building, however, is the drill hall. And this is a balcony, a staircase to one of the two balconies in the drill hall. And on the right, you can see the space as it exists now. Just a wonderful open space, wooden ceilings, and some fantastic steel scissor trusses that kind of hold the whole building together.
I'm so glad to see that someone that cares about it is getting in there, because the hardest part is that the National Guard can't take care of them as well as someone that really cares about it.
Yeah.
I would like to make the motion.
Okay, before we have, Bruce, tell us about, there's so many new people today. The division's wonderful book on arms.
Yeah, we did publish a book
Oh, yes.
probably 10 years ago now on New York State Armories. It was written by Nancy Todd, who was one of our historic preservation program analysts. And I think there's still copies around.
You would bring it, Emily.
I forgot because I was running around
That's right.
doing traffic.
And a multiple property nomination, for anybody who doesn't know, is a group of nominations that are similar, like all of the armories, that are nominated under one context. They're all individually listed, but it brings them together with shorter nominations because the general context for the armories are all under the main thing. We've nominated, do you remember how many?
I know that there are about maybe 12 or 15 of these now that have been listed. There was
way more than that, I can't remember.
There's a lot in New York
Anyway,
City as
quite a few
individuals.
of armories have been listed already. This is one we're just adding to it that we didn't do before.
Did I read that there's actually a third armory?
Yes.
Is that unusual to have?
Well,
or
the third armory was 1965, so that's the end of the period of significance for this. And it's it's a modern building which is more in keeping with the needs of the group, which by that time had become an armored group rather than an armored cavalry group rather than an infantry group.
So rather than using one of the previous structures, they built this newer structure because it met their needs more? Is that?
Well, the first armory was declared to have some structural problems, though that's kind of dubious given that it still survives and is still in use. The second armory was built, and you can see how much more fancy and fantastic it is in terms of an element of civic pride. And the third armory came into play in the 1960s, so we're talking about the era of Vietnam. And by that time, the company, which had started out being the 33rd separate company, which fought in the Spanish-American War and then became Company F, and we know that they were in the Pacific during World War II, had become another engineering company which actually focused on vehicle maintenance and vehicle use. Now, this building was not really very well set up for having a garage and extra facilities. The new building is. So that's part of the reason why in 1965 it was released and a new building was created.
It is surprising that there'd be three in a comparatively small village that periodically largely disappears in floods. So,
Now this is
but
fairly
they're very
high.
well defended.
This is quite high on this side of the river.
When we get to part 3, the modern armories, I'm sure we'll be revisiting.
It's great to see another armory, and suggests other possibilities, doesn't it, for multiple submissions across the
Yes.
state, courthouses or homestead parks or whatever it's going to be. And publications, it'd be great to see the revision to another book. And I think Syracuse University Press would be interested in talking about the publishers. So, Darrell, now you, I think, made the motion.
Yes.
And Wayne, would you like a second? All in favor?
So my second nomination is a fairly contemporary building, built starting in 1947, the James M. and Eleanor Lafferty House in Niskayuna, Schenectady County. And it's locally significant for invention and on the criterion B and architecture. And what's so wonderful about this is that the nomination was submitted by the occupants of the house on the behest of the 9-year-old daughter, who unfortunately couldn't be here today. But she had learned about the historic preservation movement in school, and she asked her mother why her house wasn't on the National Register. And since the house was designed by an architect, Victor Sivkin, who has become locally known in Fairfield, Connecticut, and is beginning to be known to some degree here. He was a GE associated architect, and he did much of his work in Connecticut, but he did do a significant number of buildings and residences in our area. So the 9-year-old asked, and her mother wrote up a very interesting nomination and sent us the pictures, and it's a fabulous building. It's a really lovely building, not much changed from when it was first conceived. So we've nominated this under a period of significance of 1947, which is the date we have for the blueprints when they were first developed, and to 1966, 50 years from the present. And the owners of the house, James M. and Eleanor Lafferty, were associated with the GE Research Lab. And Lafferty was very important in terms of the field of vacuum science. He was president of the vacuum science organizations, professional organizations on the national level and involved in the international level. And he was worked with Saul Dushman, who was known as the father of vacuum science, at the GE Research Lab. And the research lab started in downtown Schenectady in the garage of Steinmetz. And in the 1950s, it moved out to Niskayuna. And as a result, there's a big rush for the professionals who were involved in the lab to build new houses. They had been focused on the war effort, and as I talked to one man who's 96 years old who worked with James Lafferty, he said, we all just wanted to build our houses and have our families and, and live life to the full. So this house was commissioned by James Lafferty from Victor Sivkin, who was a Russian emigre, Ukrainian Russian emigre from post-World War I. He had worked as an architect. He became the head of the GE Kitchen Institute, and he's known to some as the founder of the triangle plan in kitchens. And people say, what's the triangle plan? And that's the efficiency where you walk one step to your stove, one step to your refrigerator, and one step to your sink. And so this very tight galley-like kitchen is almost completely attributed to Sivkin and his Kitchen Institute work. So in this particular image, we see the house, and we see James Lafferty below at about the time that he was building the house. These are the blueprints. You can see that they're very, very similar to the house as it is now. It's had an extension put on with a 2-car garage. It originally only had a 1-car garage, so it has changed a bit with the times. But the extension was actually designed by Douglas Lafferty, James Lafferty's son. So he understood the building very well, and it's a very sympathetic addition. This is the house from the rear. It's a split level, which was one of the characteristics of Sivkin's work. And Sivkin was one of the very first people who started to use the split level design as a basic organizing structure for his buildings. And every level reflected a different sort of function that you would use. So kind of in light, you would have the basement would be your utilities, the next floor would be things like the laundry, the floor above that would be the social living spaces, the floor above that was the bedrooms, the quiet space, and the very top, because of Mr. Lafferty's profession, was a study, a fabulous rooftop study. Now this is Sivkin. This is an example of his very tight, very well-designed and crafted kitchens. He used to roam around the country speaking for GE and creating the kind of all-American kitchen, cooking with gas, I think was one of the phrases that comes out of that period of time. And he did some of the exhibits at the 1939 World's Fair where GE promoted the new kitchen design and kitchen appliances. And he also actually redesigned the White House kitchen in 1935. So this was one of the things that he's known for, and the other thing is, as I say, the split level. Here is Amelia, who is the sponsor of the nomination, and sitting in this rather lovely house. It has a lot of other elements which are very much like those of Frank Lloyd Wright. It brings the outside inside very beautifully. There's a strong focus on materials, lots of use of redwood, glass and glass brick. They originally had oak floors, stainless steel in the kitchens, linoleum, which was then a fairly new material, Montel metal, and stone again. So all of this is very much part of the design and part of the sort of elements of Sibkin's work in general. And here's another, sorry, the wrong button. Yeah, gotta get that. So the last element, the last picture of it is that we have a window wall, a beautiful window wall, where you look out into the landscape. And the Sibkin incorporated, as I say, the landscape beautifully into these houses. It has a window wall, steel windows, very minimal obstruction to the view. He has a roof deck on the second floor. It really is a lovely example of his work and a lovely example of modernism in this area. So this is the Eleanor and the James M. and Eleanor Lafferty house in this community.
That girl has the ultimate show and tell for her classroom.
Yeah, she's a very precocious kid and a lot of fun to meet.
Kristen, will you move it?
Absolutely, fabulous.
Jay seconds.
Good. Okay, my third nomination is the Hepburn Library of Lisbon in St. Lawrence County, and this nomination was prepared by Matt Schoen, the historian at Preservation Studios in Buffalo. And he grew up in Lisbon, and he wanted to give back to the community by nominating this building and helping to put it on the National Register. And the Hepburn libraries were all built by Alonzo Barton Hepburn between 1912 and 1920. And Hepburn is a very interesting man because he started out as a commissioner of education in St. Lawrence County, and he served in all these small rural districts. He was going to the small schools, and he was talking to the teachers and helping to make sure that the students received an adequate education. And what he realized was how limited the resources were for education in the rural part of this particular county. So he became a member of the New York State Assembly in the 1870s, and he later became the New York State Superintendent of Banking, and then the Federal Controller of the Currency. And in the beginning of the 20th century, he became rich. He became the president of Chase Bank, and he got to be quite rich. And he decided that... Let me give you that.
That's pretty amazing. Thank you. Go ahead. Sorry.
That's okay. So he decided to give back by building these libraries. And what he demanded in the communities was that each community, and these communities are under 2,000 people, townships of under 2,000 people in many cases, would have to vote to accept the library and raise $1,000 for the library. And in exchange, he would give them the library and $50,000 endowment. So it's a pretty good deal, except that, of course, if you're talking about 1,500 people, men, women, and children, that's a sizable task to raise that kind of library. So Hepburn built 7 of these libraries, and the one that we're talking about in Lisbon is the most exceptional of those libraries because it's the only one that was not actually built by Eric Rosen York City. This building was actually done by Samuel D.P. Williams of Ogdensburg, and it's the only one that is like that. Now, Rossiter established the pattern. There's a community room on the ground floor, and there's a library on the second floor. And he recognized, again, Rossiter recognized probably because of Hepburn's experiences in the county, he recognized the need for a kind of secular meeting space that could bring the community together in many ways. So these community rooms, which are down here, this is the kitchen and this is the community room, and up here is the library, and it functions almost independently of one another, but the library was intended to, the community room was intended to bring people to the building, and the library upstairs would be something they would discover in the process. So here's a picture of the staircase and the community room downstairs. The room is now handicapped accessible and has a small elevator in the corner, but basically nothing has changed except for enlarging this opening. They have fireplaces. These buildings were really built to be kind of exemplars to elevate the spaces that people normally had access to. And this is the upper floor. This is the actual library, and still very much in use today. You can see the kids. Oh, sorry. You can see the kids who are playing right there, video games, but also going to the children's section and having being read to. There are activities to teach kids nutrition. It's a very, very active program. So the period of significance, as I mentioned, is 1966, but the building is still actively in use today, and it's still a vital community resource. So I bring you the Hepburn Library with its safe, Mr. Hepburn, and the famous spiral staircase that everybody in Lisbon talks about.
The safe was for the currency and not the books.
The safe is for the documents, supposedly, but unfortunately, I'm told it's a little bit musty, and nobody stores anything that is nowadays.
Jake, would you like to make a motion?
Absolutely.
Okay, I second. All in favor?
Okay, and my last recommendation is the old Lowville Cemetery in Lewis County, and the nomination materials were developed by Charlotte Eagle, who's the town and village of Lowville historian. It's locally significant under settlement and exploration and social history, and also under criterion paid for art, the funerary art. So this is the cemetery now. You can see that there's a walking trail through it. Again, this is a bird's eye view from the 1880s, and you can see there was actually a railroad that ran through it at one time. These are just some general views of the cemetery. It's quite small. It's in the town. It's owned by the town of Lowville, though it's in the village of Lowville, and that's because this was the very first cemetery in that southern part of the town. The area was settled in 1798. The town of Lowville was established in 1800, just 2 years later. The first town meeting was in 1802, and at that meeting they called for a public cemetery. And this is one of the cemeteries. They called for two cemeteries. This is the one that still survives from that period. It's very interesting in terms of the types of burials that are involved. The early burials include the town settlers. They include the clergy, the first doctor in town, the second doctor in town, the superintendent of the Lowville Academy. And then in 1868, Franklin Hough, whose building is a National Historic Landmark, also in Lowville, develops a rural cemetery. And after that, the character of the cemetery changes a lot. And what's interesting is that it becomes a cemetery of the less affluent classes. But what we find is a very interesting collection of burials to Civil War veterans, African Americans in the community, and what I would call just general folks.
I thought those biographies were terrific, and we've seen a lot of cemeteries in recent years, and there's of course a lot about funerary art and evolution of stones, but this is almost a model nomination, I think, in terms of bringing those interred to life through those small bios.
So I just wanted to show a couple of the stones. In the nomination, you may have read about the superintendent of schools of the Sunday school. This is Ruth Wilder, who was one of the original settlers. He actually founded a lot of the mills in Lionel. This is Henry Diefendorf's tombstone. He was the African-American member of the New York Volunteers, serving the regular forces with white people from the North Country. And this is actually fairly common that in the North Country they did have integrated regiments and integrated groups. And this is the stone of Milo Tuttle, who was a drummer boy, went to war weighing 185 pounds at the age of 15. He was interned in Andersonville prison for 11 months and weighed 80 pounds or so when he was brought home by his mother and died a week or so after he returned. So this is his stone. So these are really poignant stories to me, and they say something about the kind of community Lowville was. But one of the things that I think the story that almost is the most moving is the story here of William Thompson's grave. He had TB. He went to Arizona to be healed. It got worse. They told him he would die within 2 weeks. He bought a cot and he had himself carried to the train station, and people, anonymous people, probably Pullman conductors and others, took care of him and got him all the way across the country from Arizona to Lowville. And he came back, and he did die in his mother's home, and he was buried from the Baptist church, and the community made this front page news that he had died, and people came with flowers in his grave. It was a real community recognition of this family, this African-American family in Lowville. So for those reasons, I think that this is just a really remarkable story about this cemetery and the community's pride in it. And then, just to quickly do a few of the images of funerary art from the early 19th century that we have at this particular cemetery. So I bring you the Lowville Cemetery.
Is it still active? I'm sorry, is it still active or is it?
No, the last burial was in 1923.
Oh, okay.
Since then, everything has been at the Lowville Rural Cemetery.
Okay, who's it, Daryl, when Jay were tied for second?
My name is Virginia Marcus, and I'm the National Register representative for the Finger Lakes, and it also includes Onondaga and Portland County, which typically aren't thought of as Finger Lakes areas. And this piece of paper is not going to blow up, so I'm going to hold it. The first nomination that I'm presenting is the Dennis Newton House in Ithaca in Tompkins County. And this modest-looking two-story wood frame house was built around 1869 by Norman Dennis that was inherited by his daughter Lula Newton in 1893. The house was recently saved from the wrecking ball through the efforts of Historic Ithaca Incorporated, who is the sponsor of this nomination, and also the author of the nomination as well, and also the City of Ithaca, which is a certified local government. As you can see from these recent images, the house is in rough shape, but is structurally sound and retains much of its historic fabric to its period of significance, which in this case is 1869 to 1932, reflecting the ownership of Norman Dennis and his daughter and son-in-law. The building is being nominated under Criterion A in the area of social history and Criterion C for architecture. Here we're looking toward the main entrance of the main stair that was immediately opposite the doors. And as you saw in the nomination, the house is connected to the founding of Alpha Phi Alpha, the first Greek-letter African-American fraternity in the United States, established at Cornell University in 1906. Edward Newton was a steward at one of the fraternity houses at Cornell and saw firsthand the difficulty the students of color had to find meeting and study space at the Cornell campus. And there were 15 African-American students enrolled in the university in 1905. He and Lula rented a room to one of the students, Charles Poindexter, who had the idea to form a study and social group, and the Newtons supported his request that they would meet at the house. By the 1906-1907 academic year, the idea of forming a fraternity was introduced, and the rest, as they say, is history. It's
It's my understanding that the current owner of the house plans to use the tax credits to rehabilitate it as rental property. And as previously stated, the sponsor of the nomination is Historic Incorporated, and the nomination received a letter of support from the mayor of Ithaca. So this is the Dennis Newton house.
I'll move. Do we have a second? All in favor?
Move on to Monroe County. The rest of my nominations are from Monroe County. This is the Webster Grange, number 436, in the village of Webster, Monroe County. Constructed in 1899, the Webster Grange was designed by the Rochester architectural firm of Walker & Briggs, with a prominent facade rarely seen in rural Grange buildings. Prominent features on the facade are the recessed entrance, bladed window, and barrel vaulted roof parapet. The building was built into a north-facing slope and is basically a two-story building with a full basement and a two-story north addition. Like most Grange buildings, members assisted with the construction with funds and donated materials, and in this case, the stone for the foundation. The building is being listed under Criterion A for social history with its connection to the Grange movement and Criterion C for architecture. The building was described in the January 1900 edition of the New York State Ranger and again in the June 20th, 1903 edition of the Rural New Yorker. At street level, the building featured a large open auditorium made possible by steel girder supports, and it has a stage at the far end and a ticket booth in the entrance lobby, seen in the lower right. The upper level featured the Grange room, seen in the upper right, and next to it the current use as the rehearsal room for the barbershop group. The basement level has a dining room and kitchen, and as you can see by the side-by-side images in the lower part, it retains much of its historic fabric and character. The nomination goes into great detail about the building's construction and current use by the chorus of the Genesee. And it should be emphasized that they still use the auditorium space for community gatherings and as entertainment value as was done in the early days of the Grangers. The Grange still uses rooms in the North Addition, but the main caretaker building is now the chorus of the Genesee. This is the second unusual rural fraternity building now used for community entertainment in the Finger Lakes area has been brought before the board, at least I've brought before the board. The first being the Knights of the Maccabees, the building to south of Canandaigua in Ontario County, which we listed in 2013. So this is the Webster Grange.
Gwen, would you like to? Sure. Okay, and Gwen, you want a second?
Sure.
Okay. All in favor?
Around to Fairport. The Austin Conant House in Fairport is being nominated under Criterion A for social history as represented in the lifestyle of some of the village's prominent citizens, and Criterion C for architecture as an excellent example of late Gothic revival residential architecture and a rare example of the Small Finger Lakes community. Constructed around 1876, it was the home of Austin and Mary Conant. After passing through two subsequent family ownerships, it was divided into 3 apartments in 1961 and a north wing was added. Here we have the south side wing and 2 of the porches described in the nomination. The building is 2 stories with a full basement, and the entrance to it is barely visible in the lower right slide. When new owners bought the building in 2005, they began the restoration of the house, turning it back into a single-family residence, a process which is being continued by the current owner. The view on the right is looking from the front parlor. Actually, the view on the left is looking from the front parlor into the entrance, and the other image is the current staircase. You can see where the stair hall was closed off for an apartment. Just to refresh your memory, Conant was the bookkeeper for the DeLong and Company in Fairport, which at that time made baking powder. The view on the left is the ceiling medallion in the dining room, one of many period details extant, and the other view is looking from the library east through the dining room toward the parlor. The sponsor of the nomination is the owner, who also wrote the nomination. And I should mention that he is a also a supporter of historic preservation, and his work on the nomination inspired him to apply for an appointment to the local preservation commission. I should also mention that the house was recently locally landmarked earlier this year, and we've received a letter of support from the mayor of Fairport. So this is the Austin Comment House.
Okay, Tara, moves it, Wayne seconds, all in favor?
Next, we're on to the Maplewood boundary increase. And I should mention, since we do have new people on board, we often have listings for historic districts. And then we are allowed to increase or alter or amend the boundary for a number of reasons. And in this case, it's because new evidence has surfaced as to, including new research. There was survey work done that brought up some information about the areas. Now, the listed district is outlined in green, okay? That is the current listed district. And we're adding the areas in black because they have they share a similar history, they have a similar type of architecture, and also at this period in Rochester's history, there was a lot of residential growth going on, and areas of the city were just literally being bought up by all these tracts that were being developed as residences. And parts of that were added to this historic district as well were, for some reason, parts of these tracts that got blocked off. So we're also making this what we call a more logical boundary. As explained in the nomination document, the justification includes some of these, the new information that has been surfacing. And this is it's a little difficult to read. This is from the consultant who was working on the nomination draft. And what she's shown is the areas that have been crosshatched. This is an old tract map, and this shows you the areas that were being added. I should mention also that the areas being added share the same period of significance, which for the listed district is circa 1870 to 1945. The boundary expansion was sponsored by the Maplewood Neighborhood Association with funding from the Preservation League of New York State and the Rochester Area Community Foundation. I also need to thank the Landmark Society of Western New York because they were also very, at the beginning of the project, very supportive, and we're riding around Rochester looking at these and trying to figure out what we had going on here. So it's a lot of people who had some impetus in them, but really the prime movers are the neighborhood association itself. And I should also say that what they wanted to do and what they were very concerned with is an eligible census tract. And so they're looking to expand the number of people in their community that can take advantage of the homeowner tax credit. And I should mention that even before we've got approval on the boundaries, we started receiving homeowner tax credit applications because we're fairly confident that this will take place. That is, the boundary increase will take place. Some of the expansion areas include the end of Maplewood to Lake Avenues, which are the main roadways through the district, and in the eligible, and as I mentioned, it makes it more coherent. The largest areas are the streets of Albemarle and Alameda, which go all the way from Lake Avenue to Dewey. We're also adding small portions of Augustine, Burke Terrace, and Burr Street. Several of the houses being added were architect designed, similar to the listed district, and many of the same architects, by many of the same architects. A few commercial buildings along Dewey were also added, which may encourage these owners to take advantage of rehabilitation tax credits as well. Any questions about this? No, I went through it rather quickly, but we're adding 200 properties to 400 that are already listed.
Jake, would you like to make a motion?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I thought I read it was almost doubling it. There were over, did I misread that? There were over 400 properties?
400 currently.
430
but
to another
that should-
400?
Yeah, I should back up.
Sorry.
That's 432 contributed. And
I wrote a note to myself that it was essentially doubling it, so I just wanted to make
it's
sure.
been a
that-
lot since I've lived in this.
Yeah.
You may be right.
I'm sorry, and I don't.
But it would be in the.
It's a lot.
Yeah, it would be in the nominee.
Okay.
When it comes to numbers, I have to.
Okay.
I have never.
Okay, no worries. Just, it was a different number than I had,
Yeah.
so,
So
okay.
you probably got the right number up front. But it's
Thank
right
you.
in the nomination.
Okay, what's in the nomination is
That's all that
correct. Excellent. Thank you.
We have a motion and a second if you second it. Kristen?
Sure.
And all in favor?
Aye.
The two second
Okay.
and Jake.
Got it. All right, good morning. I'm Jennifer Metzler. My territory is Long Island, 5 boroughs in New York City, and I have a tiny foothold in the Valley, which is Ulster County. I didn't have auctioneer speed training in my public history program, but I'll do the best that I can. So this is the Church of Our Lady of Kazan in Seacliff. It's significant under criterion A in the areas of social and ethnic history for its association with the establishment of a Russian cultural and religious community in Seacliff and the national trend of 20th century Russian immigration into the United States. So Russian immigrants began arriving in Seacliff during the 1920s, and by the 1940s, the community of immigrants and refugees was growing substantially. In 1942, a group of 35 families got together. They'd been traveling to other communities for their religious services, and they established Our Lady of Kazan. The church is also significant under criterion C as an unusual and rare example of Russian Orthodox folk architecture. Its design is based on Northern European wooden churches and is specifically modeled after small 16th century skeets, which were small wooden monasteries in northern Russia. It's additionally significant for its collection of Byzantine-style icons completed by masters of the trade. So architect Boris Rydabov, an immigrant, he donated land and a small garage for the church. He drew up architectural plans for it, its conversion, and oversaw its move to the land for the church property. And while Rydabov was established the design, the project was a parish affair. Community members worked on the building, sewed vestments and banners, acquired church vessels, and carved wooden church furnishings under Rydabov's direction. The church underwent a series of expansions during the 1940s and 50s as the congregation grew, and all those expansions were designed and overseen by Rydabov, who you see here. That's right around the same time. This photo on the right shows the very first expansion, the construction of a 1.5-story outer narthex topped by a copper-clad dome. And I love that you can see the priest here in his Cossack helping to raise that. So here's just a few photos of the interior. It's really a jewel box of a building. This is from the chapel area in front of the building looking toward the entrance. You see the doors there at the end, all along the walls on the side. You have similar wooden doors with the glass panels like that. Here we are looking from the entrance in, and a closer up view here. And this is Our Lady of Kazan in this corner, the artist created. So in addition to the church, the nomination does include the parish house, which is this bungalow, which was moved to the property in 1948, a mid-century rectory, this archway, which was the last project that Rydabov designed and helped to build on the property, and then this bell tower, which Rydabov designed but was completed after his death. Are there any questions about Our Lady of Kazan?
Jennifer, I will move it, but can you go back to the interior?
Isn't it spectacular?
This one more back. It's an absolute jewel box. That's a wonderful term for this church. I went to Rydabov's daughter's funeral here a few years ago, and they hand you one of those candles, which you hold standing through the whole funeral. It was without a doubt the longest funeral I have ever attended.
Yeah, it's a small building, and we are going to be getting better photographs of the interior for the final nomination. One of the gentlemen who's sponsoring it was related to Rydabov, and he was very interested in having brighter pictures somehow. So they're going to be working on that. Yes?
Who will second? Okay, Kristen seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So onward, elsewhere on Long Island. So very quickly, I'm going to hand you these. We have 6 letters of support and 1 letter of objection. I'm expecting another one. And I'll mention all those specifically, but I did want to get them to you right away. So this is the Benner Separano estate, built 1893 through 1895, significant under criterion A for its exceptional land-rich design, which I'm moving for its association with the development of summer estates along the north shore of Long Island during the late 19th and early 20th century. Benner is a New York City lawyer, was interested in yachting and fishing, and he established the estate on Port Jefferson Harbor, and you can see it right here on that historic map. So as I was starting to say, it's also additionally significant under criterion C for its exceptional land-rich design, which blends the shingle and colonial revival styles in a way that balances informality and asymmetry with high-style formal elements. The Benner Mansion is particularly notable as the only one of their designs with a bowed plan. Rich may have been inspired by the bowed McKinley and white design from John Cowley's home in Far Rockaway, which is no longer extant. The unusual form results in a concave facade which faces onto the entry road and a convex rear elevation which effectively serves as an expansive secondary facade visible from the water. This design harmonizes with the landscape and adds playfulness to the more formal elements of the building. Here's just a few quick interior shots. We've got some dated wallpaper, but otherwise the building is very intact, very lovely from top to bottom. Here's a view out to Port Jefferson Harbor from the house itself. So there are still vestiges of the landscape designed by J. Wilkinson Elliott, the Pittsburgh landscape architect. Elliott framed the mansion with rows of trees that both serve as a screen and draw the eye to the water. In addition, he established the property's meandering roads, ornamental plantings, specimen trees, and the location of its orchard and kitchen garden. This is a view back toward the mansion from the farmhouse. The farmhouse was situated downhill from the mansion. It was partially residential, partially a barn. And it has a simpler design that features elements that complement those of the mansion, such as its combination of fiber and shingle, use of Palladian windows, and its wide Dutch door, which, as you'll notice, is very, very similar to that on the mansion itself. These here are from the part of the building that was historically used as a residence. This was actually from the 40s expansion into the barn part of the building when it was totally converted as a residence. So they didn't copy over a lot of the details when they did that. So to our support letters, we have letters from Steve Engelbright, State Assemblyman, Suffolk County Legislator Kara Hahn, Brookhaven County Historian Barbara Russell, and from 3 of the owners. And I've received 1 letter of objection from 1 of the owners and expecting 1 from the other. So we have a total of 5 owners, 3 are in support, and 2 are objecting. So I wanted to be sure you had all that information.
Jennifer, the 2 that are objecting, are they both associated with the same property?
Yes, so the mansion is owned by 3 sisters. 1 sister supports the nomination, the other 2 sisters do not support the nomination. They are trying to sell the property at this time. And the nomination was actually written and largely driven by one of the owners of the farmhouse, Jane Corrino. So the aim is that hopefully listing can help attract a buyer who might want to use tax credits or a nonprofit who could possibly use grants to help fix up the building rather than somebody who will come in and knock down the mansion and divide the property for a subdivision. But since there's a little bit of a family tension, you have all the information.
What is their reason for not supporting it? I'm sorry, just because it hasn't reached me yet? Are they the same
Well,
case?
the very last letter is the 1 letter of objection I've received so far. She actually does, for some reason, think that this sister I haven't spoken to, she thinks we're trying to become a 3rd owner of the property. I've spoken to the other sister and I explained everything to her, and she had a lot of misconceptions about what the National Register meant. But basically, what last one I heard from her was that, yes, maybe we'd like maybe the next owner of the property to do this, but we're not sure we want this at this time. And I think there's some sibling issues going on here too. But I did explain to Christina, who I have not received her letter yet, that really this would not necessarily prevent any future development of the property. Just create some opportunities.
Does this become a district because of its multiple ownerships, or?
No.
I mean, ordinarily, if we have 3 favoring and 2 opposed, it's not objectionable to the National
Well,
Park
yes,
Service.
the majority support the nomination, so through all technicality, there's no reason that we should
It doesn't make it
stop
a
the
district, that just depends on the number of buildings. It probably is a district.
It's 2 buildings, so it's like a mini
So,
district.
yeah.
State.
Well, again, that objection seems to be based on a misconception of what
Yes.
this even means. So, to me, that objection is not.
And so for the new kids, if it
Well,
turns out that we
No,
nominate, but then something, yeah, what happens, what could go wrong? If we nominate and we say we want to make this property.
Jennifer, I have a question about your point. And when you say it doesn't affect future development, is that true? Because once it's established as on the historic register, it does include certain types of development.
So as long as a private owner of a National Register listed property is using their own funds, they can modify, add, demolish that property unrestricted.
Subdivide.
As long as they're using private funds.
Okay,
It's not just that, it's eligible anyway, so the same restrictions apply.
So there's no legal consequence for putting it on
If
the
they were
register.
doing something that involves state or federal funding or permits, we would be looking at any eligible or listed structures. So since it's already eligible, listing doesn't confer any additional restrictions, and it confers some possible benefits or new avenues to help keep this really lovely building.
It does make it a type, yeah, it makes it a type 1 seeker action, so there is a possibility of some effect, but slight.
And it could also be that there's a town ordinance saying the properties that are listed on the National Register then are protected by the police power of the town, but we shouldn't go there.
Well, your job is just to rule on whether or not it meets the criteria.
Right.
That's specifically your job. Not the, I mean, listing can go either way. Somebody could say, oh, you listed my property, I'm going to burn it down. You can't predict what somebody's going to do. So your job is really just to apply the criteria.
I'm happy to move in favor of the 3 as opposed to the 2.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Thank you very much. Sorry to bring such a complicated one to you, but it happens. So this is the Haxton Tower House. It's significant under criterion C as a noteworthy regional example of late Greek revival residential architecture in Dutchess County. It's built circa 1850 for William Haxton and repeatedly expanded circa 1870 for Albert Tower. The house clearly reflects the influence of period builders' guides. In 1846, at age 14, William Haxton discovered substantial iron deposits on his family's property. And within a few years, his father had given him some land and he begun to establish his own farm. So it's a very young success story out in Dutchess County. Seeking to project that success and his status as an eligible bachelor, he sought out a skilled builder and copied details directly from Menard Reviewers Builder's Guides. The details of this house are just wonderful. And the design and level of detail speak to the wealth he achieved as a young man, as well as the importance and value of iron mining in Beekman during the 19th century. And speaking of spectacular, these parlors are copied directly out of Beaver. Great building. So Poughkeepsie Iron Baron Albert Tower purchases the land and the house between 1867 and 1871. And after first developing the Beekman mine across the street from the house, Tower modified the Paxton House into a summer retreat, and it remained in the Tower family until 1929. So it's just a few quick pictures elsewhere on the property. This is a basement entrance here, it's a basement kitchen, and that's the interior of that basement entrance. Original finish, really spectacular door into a basement. And this is very lovely and interesting in that main central hallway, right at the base of the proper stairs, there's this spiral staircase that goes up from the central hallway to the second floor and then into the attic. It's a little dark, at the top of the stairs is one of the bedrooms. So that's the Caxton Tower House.
Our representative from the Hudson River Valley will make
Very
a
happy
motion.
to.
And who will second? Jay seconds, all in favor?
Aye.
On to the Alton Parker House. It's nationally significant under criterion B for its association with Alton B. Parker, Chief Judge of the New York State Court of Appeals and Democratic Party candidate in the United States presidential election of 1904. Well-respected and a leader in New York's Democratic Party, Parker was persuaded to run against Roosevelt as an alternative to William Jennings Bryan, who had lost the 2 previous presidential contests and divided the party. And although he was known as a progressive humanitarian and hardworking judge, he proved a lot less effective as a political campaigner. Believing that a sitting judge should not express political opinions, he did not campaign for the nomination. Furthermore, he did not attend the Democratic National Convention where he won the nomination. A month later, party officials and press assembled at Rosemount to hear Parker's acceptance speech. And so this is a photograph of that acceptance speech and a political cartoon showing everyone coming to him at his house. And this expresses sort of a similar concept. He's expecting his followers to come to him. Unwilling to travel, Parker ran his campaign from home. Over the weeks leading up to the election, Rosemount, Sopas, and the Hudson River were constantly referenced in written press coverage and images representing the isolation of the candidate and his expectation that his supporters would come to him. His landslide loss to Roosevelt was the worst margin of defeat recorded to that time. So it's sort of interesting for its connection with him. I understand being the very last nominee to not attend a national convention for a political party. Rosemount is also locally significant under criterion C as a distinctive example of mid-19th century country house architecture and landscape design in the Hudson Valley, and particularly in the town of Sopas. The house has an 18th century stone house hidden in its core and evolved over a series of campaigns extending from 1760 approximately to circa 1860. And after he purchased the house in 1898, Parker made substantial updates to the first floor interior. You can see these are a few of the parlors. This is the dining room, which he updated, and his library, which is rather lovely. It's not the best picture there. Here we have the roof of that stone house that is still visible in the attic, which is quite wonderfully encapsulated. And then this is part of the basement kitchen. And then I just have a few photographs of the landscape and the outbuildings associated with the property. The owner actually is putting a historic preservation easement on the estate. So to include the house as well as some of the outbuildings, I understand, not all of it. And he's also in the process of pursuing historic tax credits for a lot of the work he's been doing there quite recently. And that is the Parker estate.
This is a very important property, and it's great news that it's being restored and that the new owners are welcoming this recognition. And it was for some years owned by an impossible woman named Barbara Patrick, who was at war with everybody about everything. So this is a good thing. Happy to move it.
And as poetic, since I live in the town of the successful 1904 candidate, I think I should
All in favor?
That's a very good point.
Thank you. All right, so further south to Bronx, the Fort Independence Historic District is significant under criterion C in the areas of architecture and community planning. The hilly neighborhood was the site of a major Revolutionary War fortification, Fort Independence, but remained generally undeveloped as did much of the Bronx into the late 19th century. The neighborhood draws its physical character from its unusual 1877 record law Olmsted Serpentine street plan, which conforms to the challenging terrain, which you can get some sense of here with the local lines. This remnant of Olmsted's plan is a rare survivor of the Bronx, where its plans were largely rejected in favor of the Manhattan street grid. During the early 20th century, single-family homes and apartment houses, many of which were architect designed, were built along Olmsted streets. The neighborhood was attractive for its proximity to public transportation and the promise of a more suburban lifestyle, and primarily features homes in styles common to the period, including bungalows, Mission and Spanish Revival, Colonial Revival, and Neo-Georgian. This is the earliest row built in the teens in the neighborhood. And there's a really great collection of Tudor Revival houses, which sort of followed after the Shaw and Lebanon houses, which I'll show you here shortly, which were Tudor Revival cooperative apartment complex. There's also a nice little tour of these stucco English cottage-style garden houses designed by the firm of Hopkins College. And then a few more pictures of houses in the neighborhood. The district is also significant under criterion A in the area of social history for its association with two individually eligible apartment complexes, which reflects innovative responses to increased demand for housing. The Shaw and Electric houses, which this building here, these buildings, and then this building. This is the only way I can show it to you, is Google Maps. They're a significant example of early 20th century working class cooperative houses pioneered by immigrant Jewish communities. The socialist founders of the cooperative aimed to help preserve secular Yiddish culture and emphasize cultural activities. And finally, the Park Reservoir Housing Cooperative, built in 1957, is one of the city's very first Mitchell-Lama housing complexes. Designed to encourage the construction of middle-class housing, Mitchell-Lama was the first New York housing program intended to fill the gap between public housing and unrestricted development. Park Reservoir's tower and the park design is typical of early Mitchell-Lama projects. We do have a letter of support from LPC on this one, and the district nomination was sponsored by the Fort Independence Neighborhood Association based on a 2011 survey that they did of the neighborhood. And that's Fort Independence. Any questions?
Jay makes the motion. Jake, did I see your hand? Seconds? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. And finally, I have the Bushwick Avenue Central Methodist Church, which was completed between 1900 and 1912. Significant under criterion A for its association with the development of the Bushwick neighborhood in Brooklyn. The church was built and expanded during a prosperous period in the neighborhood's history when a great diversity of churches were built to cater to its growing population. The church was designed by architect George W. Kramer and is additionally significant under criterion C for its Renaissance revival design and combination church plan. Kramer specialized in religious architecture and designed around 2,200 churches over the course of his career. During the 1880s, Kramer worked for Jacob Snyder's firm in Ohio, where he became familiar with Snyder's Akron plan. Kramer built upon the Akron plan, which featured an attached but fully separate Sunday school, to develop his own variant, the combination church. Rather than having the sanctuary and Sunday school platforms back to back, a combination church places them side by side to allow for the use of the entire space at once if necessary. This is the Sunday school room. You can see the elaborate stenciling and decoration, which is wonderful, but it's still all in place. It's a feature of the Akron plan and is used, it's a little dark, but it's here up all onto the ceiling and then on the doors. And while the neighborhood has continued to change over the course of the 20th century, the church does still play an active role in its community and is used by its original congregation, which I'm increasingly learning is very rare in New York City. So that is the Bushwick Avenue Church.
Jennifer, this is one of the last ones I read, and so I'm sorry I didn't call you about it. And I realized
this was a Columbia graduate.
Yeah, this was a Columbia graduate. You were just the editor. But I felt that this application pole vaulted from 1912 to the architect with not even a paragraph about the church. So I went to the Brooklyn Daily Eagle online, and wonderfully, just in the last year or so, it's gone from 1902 right up into to the end in 57, I think it is. And I found over 6,500 matches or hits for this church. And I started to look at just a few of them. And I read in 1915, this church was the site of a major Methodist Episcopal convention attended by 300 Methodist ministers and presided over by the Methodist bishop. It sponsored sports teams, and this was a flagship church of the Methodist Church in New York State. So then I went to the bibliography to see if the preparer had looked at a Methodist history, and I saw no mention of that. And I don't think this should go to Washington without a few paragraphs about this church.
I'd be happy to continue working with the student on this one. Some of the trouble with working with students is that I can push and push, and then they are in another semester. So I will push back on this one some more and say that the state review board has specifically asked for additional information, because I think that is a very crude suggestion.
Well, I'd be happy to make the motion now with the understanding that something will be added.
And I would second what Jennifer said. We're not really happy with a lot of the student nominations we're getting, and it seems that the professors just pass them on to us. They don't grade them and give them back. They just say, here's what the student did. So we're kind of working on that.
Between how much push the student to get more, how much I want or have the time to do myself. And I think that your assessment is absolutely fair, and it needs more work.
Well, is there some sort of a protocol that we can offer to the professors, to the faculty, that, we don't want to reject this, or we don't want to discontinue this service, which is educationally a benefit to the students, but if it's not going to work, I mean, it's the faculty that should make it work.
Right. Well, we've had this in several of the universities where they teach preservation, and I'm trying to figure out how to deal with whether I get the faculty in here and train them and say, well, if you're not going to take the nomination all the way, then don't teach the course, because what they do is they say, okay, here, you've completed my course, now you're a professional.
Yeah, sure.
And it's actually Jenny writing the nomination, not the student, or me, or Jennifer Wachowski,
Well, and
or
there's a lot of
Emily.
remedial stuff has to happen every single time, so sometimes.
It's just a problem that we also agree with you, Bob, and we're trying to figure out a solution to it.
Well done, Mr. Chairman, though, for doing that research.
Yes, very well done. Would you like to take a crack at it?
Well, I make the motion with someone said. Someone seconds.
That's right.
Jay seconds, all in favor.
So we just approve that pending additional.
All right, hi everyone, I'm Jennifer Wachowski, and I administer the National Register program for Western New York, including Buffalo. Hi, I'm sorry, there's got a hole in the way there. But I'm going to start off in Wyoming County. This is the Orator Woodward Cottage. It's significant as a good representative example of a late 19th century summer residence designed in a sort of rustic variation of the Queen Anne style. It's actually noteworthy in the Silver Lake Institute, which is a Methodist camp, sort of like a Chautauqua. But this is one of the largest and most ornate examples in the camp. The Silver Lake Institute is already National Register listed. It was listed in 1985. Unfortunately, we looked at doing an expansion, and what's between the district and this property really doesn't warrant expanding the National Register nomination. So this was built in 1894 as a summer residence for entrepreneur Orator F. Woodward and his family. Shortly after this was built in 1899, Woodward would then go on to purchase the Jell-O formula. So he then became a very famous and very successful gentleman with Jell-O. So this is just a few different views of the exteriors being nominated under criterion C in the area of architecture. As a locally significant example of this sort of Queen Anne summer cottage, sort of a rustic design. Every surface, every texture is detailed here. It's also being nominated under criterion A in the area of social history for its associations with this Silver Lake Institute summer camp. A few views of the interior there. It was actually in the Woodward family until 1915 when it was sold to Reverend Owen C. Baker. Reverend Baker was the founder of the Epworth League, a Christian Methodist youth movement across Western New before. And he used the cottage and he invited guests who were coming to the Institute as well. And he sold the property in 1966, so we've ended the period of significance to also encompass his significance. The only major change made to the building was when it was weatherized for year-round use in 1996, but otherwise it's really a pretty charming little building. So this is the Order Woodward Cottage in Wyoming County. Any questions on this one?
Is that closer to Wayne or did you?
I'll make the motion.
Okay. All in favor?
So I'll just mention the next batch of projects I have are all related to commercial tax credit projects, and they all have received Part 1 approval from the National Park Service. So this is the Ascension Roman Catholic Church complex in North Tonawanda. It's significant as a largely intact complex of religious building, reflective of the growth and prosperity of the city of North Tonawanda and Niagara County during the late 19th and early 20th century. The complex is eligible under Criterion A in the area of social history as the first Roman Catholic church built in the city of North Tonawanda, and for its associations with various immigrant groups for over 100 years before it was eventually closed in 2007. It's the city's first parish, as I mentioned, and it also had the first Catholic school in the city of North Tonawanda, which was a real hub for the community for many years. So like many churches in Western New York, it began sort of as a German associated parish, and then later it just really was sort of a melting pot of various immigrant groups. So the Ascension Roman Catholic Church also satisfies requirements under Criterion C for the areas of architecture. It includes a church, a rectory, a school, a convent, and a parish hall. The church itself, which is right up here, sort of in the corner there, is a great example of a Gothic revival cruciform plan church. And that was sort of the model used for the architectural style for the rest of the complex. So here we have a better view of the church, as well as the interior and the rectory that's attached to it. The church was built in 1894, partially on the foundations of an 1888 building, which was actually a wood frame building that was almost identical to this one. It's actually, I didn't believe it until the consultant found me photos. The rectory was built in 1922 to replace a very small sort of frame building that had been used on that same location. And this is a view of the school. It was constructed in 1907. Its interior was reconstructed basically in the same plan and the same arrangement after a fire in 1945. And it's still very intact as a school. So this is a view of the convent that's now used as a private residence. And the parish hall, which is sort of located across the street from it, that was built in 1969. So the period of significance begins in 1888 with the foundations and plan of that original church that was used. It closes in 1969 with the construction of the parish hall. So this is Ascension Roman Catholic Church. Oh, I should mention, we just received yesterday a letter of support from the mayor, as well as the Preservation Commission. They're very excited to see a project move forward in the city of North Tonawanda. So this is the Ascension Roman Catholic Church complex.
Can I just ask a clarification? My notes are that these structures are now under separate ownership, and it's how many different owners?
There are 3 different owners, and we've received no objections from any of them.
Krista, would you like to make a motion?
Sure. I so move.
You need a second?
Second.
Okay. Oh, I understand. All in favor?
We have another Roman Catholic Church complex, St. Teresa's in Buffalo. It's locally significant under Criterion C in the area of architecture. It's a good representative collection of ecclesiastic buildings. The church complex is located in the South Buffalo neighborhood in the city of Buffalo. It contains a church, a rectory, a school, a parish hall, and an automobile garage. So St. Teresa's was the first Roman Catholic church parish established in the area now known as South Buffalo, which grew to become a major enclave of predominantly Irish Catholic parishioners. The parish was formed in 1898 to serve the burgeoning South Buffalo community and expanded as the neighborhood grew during the following 50 years and with an influx of Catholic families moving to the area. So St. Teresa's represents and reflects the growth in South Buffalo throughout the 20th century, expanding as the neighborhood grew around it. Period of significance on this one is related to criteria is 1897 to 1959, starting with the relocation of the original rectory, which is this building right here, which was down the street just a little bit over here. It was relocated as part of this complex in 1897, and then it ends with the construction of a parish hall, which is this building right here in 1959. So here's a better little close-up view of the church. The Roman Catholic Church complex features a variety of architectural styles that reflect the expansion of the parish over 60 years, from its founding to the peak of its growth. It's a good example of a late Victorian Gothic revival church designed in 1890 by architect Albert Asa Post and later expanded with a small rear addition in 1926. So here's a little view of the rectory. It's designed in the Queen Anne style, originally as a circa 1880 private residence that was donated and relocated for the church complex in 1897. It's still really pretty charmingly intact, and you can see it's Christmas. I took photos. So the school building, which is sort of behind the church, it reflects the Gothic revival detailing of the church itself, representing the evolution of school design during the 20th century. Originally, this is the sort of 1907 portion, embodies late 19th century elements that were already falling out of favor in its design, such as having only a single staircase and these sort of large walk-in closets in the hallways for the classrooms. So the 1926 edition, which actually sort of reorients the building to face away from the parking area into a street over here, demonstrates sort of new developments in school standards and added additional safety features, including additional stairways. And lastly, it was converted in 1959 during other projects, including the parish hall. So it features sort of reflected that sort of evolution in school construction and design over the years. Here's a couple views of the parish hall from 1959. It's sort of a modest example of a sort of international style building, sort of a multi-purpose, multifunctional space. There's an auditorium, gymnasium, cafeteria, so it sort of handled some of the overflow from the school itself, as well as forming a sort of a hub for the community for various functions. Currently, the church, rectory, and parish hall are all owned by the Buffalo Catholic Diocese. However, they have not objected to the listing of the church complex, and developers purchased the school, which I just showed, for reuse as apartments. So this is St. Teresa's Roman Catholic Church complex. Any questions on this one?
Okay, and we have a second. Second. All in favor? Who's J and J?
J and J, okay.
So this is Depew High School. It's locally significant under criterion C in the area of architecture as an example of this early 20th century standardized school planning. The building was originally built in 1914 and significantly expanded in 1927, designed in accordance with new and emerging and evolving state and national regulations for school design that primarily concerned health, safety, welfare of the students, and provided spaces that were well illuminated for encouraging learning. So a few exterior views working our way around the building. It's a little overgrown. It was designed by Edgar E. Jorelman on the site of the previous school that had burned down in 1913, and it really embodied these sort of progressive era ideas of sanitation, providing ample light and air circulation. The building opened in 1914 and was expanded in the rear back of this area here in 1927 by Frank Spangenberg, a local architect, as this sort of post-World War I era development that was occurring in the village of Depew. So together, the 1914 and 27 components of the building reflect the guidelines and regulations pertaining to school design during this era. So just run quickly through some of the interior views. Again, it's still really largely intact. Any alterations that have been made, as was kind of typical by these schools used for long periods, are largely cosmetic. For example, here's a skylight that's just basically closed off. So this is, the changes that have been made are reversible and really largely sort of cosmetic in their nature. So the period of significance here is from 1914 to circa 1955, when this school stopped functioning as the high school. A new high school was built for the village of Depew, and after that it became an elementary school, and then was used as administrative offices, and now this is being rehabilitated for housing. So this is Depew High School. Any questions on this?
Okay, Wayne makes the motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
And Wayne seconds, all in favor?
So here we have another middle school in Western New York, also being rehabilitated for housing. This is Public School 63, PS 63. Locally significant under criterion C in the area of architecture is another example of this sort of standardized school plan that's evolving in the early 20th century. This one was designed by City of Buffalo's Building Bureau architect Howard Elbeck in 1917. Also had an addition that was really consistent with the rest of the building, designed in 1925 by the Associated Buffalo Architects. So like the Depew High School we just looked at, again embodies those principles about hygiene, sanitation, safety, and illumination for the students to provide them with a healthy work environment for learning. The period of significance on this one begins in 1917 with the original construction and ends in 1925 with the addition that was added to the building. Now, one question that did come up in our office was that just look real quick here, the cornice has been covered with this kind of corrugated material. It was historically relatively pretty simple, modest brick with a sort of a cornice band here. A small element of it does remain. According to the project architects, they do plan to remove the corrugation for the cornice using this profile detail, and they have a series of elevation drawings to work from as well. So just wanted to clarify that from the project. So a few elevation views. It's 2 stories above a basement. It sort of has an H-shaped plan to it now. The interior is really largely intact. It's actually really a very surprisingly intact school given its age. So it was actually closed to students in 2004. It was used as a swing school for additional classrooms, but it closed permanently in 2010. So this, I do want to note on this one, we do have a letter of support from Mayor Byron Brown, the Mayor of the City of Buffalo, as well as the Preservation Board. So this is Buffalo Public School number 63.
Jennifer, I'd like to just make a general comment regarding these tax credit deals, which are primarily what we're seeing now. And in particular, St. Teresa's and the School 63 are 2 housing projects that are proposed in South Buffalo. And I know our job here is to view these as whether or not they meet the criteria, but I think it's important to note that the amount of how these projects are helping keep the momentum moving forward in Buffalo, particularly now in South Buffalo, which is an area that hasn't had any economic activity in a long, long time. Developers are starting to look there. And these 2 projects I think are both Carl Frisland's projects. He's another architect developer in town, very talented guy, who's done a lot of these projects, and just really good for the community. An aside.
Would you like to make the motion?
I certainly would.
When would you like to second? All in favor?
All right, so we had a multiple property documentation for mentioned previously. We're currently developing one for sort of middle class apartments for the City of Buffalo. Not the real high-end apartments, but not sort of low-income tenement housing as well. So each building must be individually listed, but that would provide a general context and typology for those apartments moving forward. So the rest of these projects all will be incorporated and encompassed with that project. So this is the Karnak Flats in Buffalo. It's significant as an intact, locally significant example of a late 19th century apartment building. It was constructed sort of 1898 in a colonial revival style. It's being nominated here under criterion C in the area of architecture and A in the area of social history, sort of for its associations with this development and flourishment of apartment building in the City of Buffalo during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. So this is really a very intact example from the front elevation. It is remarkably sort of ornamented, which gives this sort of modest middle-income families this sense that they're really living in in a very spectacular sort of building here. So the period of significance here begins with the initial construction circa 1898 and ends in 1930 when the building sort of transitioned away from serving the middle class sort of professional apartment families. So, okay. So this was really developed to cater to this emerging middle class resident. Many of the early residents were young professionals, including doctors, clerks, electricians. It was designed for slightly more modest use, but like I said, that front elevation really sort of gave it a sense of architectural, sort of distinguishment on the street. So a few views of the interior. The public spaces and circulation areas are all highly intact to the original. The apartment layouts are all intact to their basic configuration in the plan of the building. And like I mentioned, after the 1930s, many apartment buildings in the city of Buffalo, as people move further and further away from downtown, sort of transition to sort of a more unskilled resident. It's sort of a shorter term occupancy. So this is the Carnac Flats in Buffalo. Any questions on this one?
Jake makes the motion, and Wayne seconds, all in favor?
So in this one, we're actually nominating two separate buildings which are individually eligible. We're nominating them on one form. As you can see, they're basically next door neighbors. So it just saves on paperwork and everything, I guess. They're both apartment buildings, and they're both, this is the Ray and the Raleigh on Franklin Street in Buffalo. Significant under criterion A in the area of architecture, and criterion C in the area of social history, again associated with this development of this middle class apartment residence in the city of Buffalo. We'll pretty quickly through. Here's a better, closer view of the Ray. This was built in 1892. It's an example of what was identified as a housekeeping type of apartment. In a housekeeping apartment, this is the type where all the amenities were included within the apartment unit itself, including a kitchen, dining spaces, laundry facilities. They were all within the apartment unit. So a few architectural details. It's low-bearing construction with this sort of Norman-inspired ornamental motif with sort of a polychromatic brickwork and this beautiful sort of arched detail here. Really quickly, the interior plan is intact. The interior spaces are a little very white. But the building really still reads as a historic apartment building in its plan and configuration of spaces. Here is the Raleigh. The Raleigh was originally built in 1896 as a Jewish social club called the Phoenix. However, not long after, in 1900, it was converted for use as a non-housekeeping apartment. The non-housekeeping type implies that dining and kitchen areas were shared among the residents, but it was still aimed at a longer-term tenure. A lot of buildings in Buffalo, a lot of apartment buildings were converted around 1900 to serve the 1901 Pan American Exposition for people who would travel from supposedly all over the country to stay for months on end. So this would be used for that function, and then in 1936 it was again converted to the housekeeping type of apartment. So it actually is this really unusual sort of hidden entry through this loggia on the side. It's hard to kind of capture that, but the entry here is sort of, the cheek walls are sort of these curved elliptical bays. You can kind of get a little bit of a sense for that there. And again, the interior, the plan of the apartments and the configuration of spaces is all intact. The main circulation, really still reads like a historic apartment building. So let's see if I have anything else. So this is the Ray and the Raleigh. Are there any questions on these?
Darrell, would you like to make the motion?
I would.
Okay. And we need a second. Anybody? Okay, Jake seconds. All in favor?
One last. So this is the Colonial Flats and Annex. This is the Flats. This is the Annex. Located on Delaware Avenue in the city of Buffalo. Again, another example of this sort of turn of the century apartment living aimed at sort of a modest middle class resident. The Flats portion was constructed around 1896. The annex was added around 1900, again, to try to cater to that Pan-American Exposition clients. The flats was designed by Baughman and Johnson, and the annex by very prominent Buffalo architects, Esselwein and Johnson. Both were designed in a colonial revival style, and then there was a circa 1926 commercial addition added to the front during an era when Delaware Avenue became a much more prominent commercial thoroughfare in the area. So here's just a view of what it looked like before that commercial wing with addition was added to the front. And actually it was during that period when the two buildings became sort of functionally combined in the interior, and you can move easily between the two components here. So here's a view just looking in through you walk in through an arch in the commercial space to the sort of more recessed entry. Again, main circulation areas are all intact. The plan is all intact. Here's a few views of the apartment spaces, which retain a fairly high level of integrity to the finishes and the materials. The flats has a sort of an H-shaped plan to the apartments, while the annex has a U-shaped plan. And then the commercial spaces, the interiors have been changed as various commercial tenants have used them over the years, but it really still reads like a 1920s commercial edition. So this is the colonial flats and annex. Any questions on this?
I'll be happy to
Jake,
take the motion. I have lunch in this building almost every day.
Jay seconded, all in favor? Okay.
I need to ask you to postpone the review officially of the Fair Play Factory. The owner was foreclosed upon. It's now owned by Boone County. They sent us a letter. They'd like to wait until they have another owner, and we're encouraging them to do so and not tear it down, because we want to encourage them to go through with the tax credit project. We also got some petitions from the neighbors who urge us to vote to tear it down because it's a hazard to health and eyesore, which it isn't. But anyways, so we're just wanted to apprise you of that and tell you, so I can report back that you agreed to postpone it.
I'm sorry, Jennifer, do you have something? You say?
I was going to say something, but not after this.
Yeah, that's all.
Do you need a motion?
I don't think I do. I just need to report that to the board. You know, I reported that we're postponing it.
Oh, okay. So what we're going to do now is...
Bob, can I make a little...
Yes,
I'm sorry, I did want to just briefly say something because we've talked in the past about the importance of engaging the public in a broader way with preservation. And so I just wanted to make a little observation that there were at least 2 instances that were mentioned today. The owner of the Conant House, who was inspired by working on this nomination to join his local preservation organization, and 9-year-old Amelia, who was inspired by her schoolwork to say, hey, why isn't my house on the register? She's the future of preservation. That owner, who is now joined the Preservation Commission, is taking a bigger role, and I just thought those were great, commendable stories of folks who, you know, who we can encourage more of us to become more engaged in preservation.
Great point, Kristen. Austin, I hope you're taking notes.
No, we have a little certificate program. Maybe we could do a certificate for her.
Well, especially a 9-year-old who,
Yeah,
you know, being
that's
part of
what I
a
mean.
9-year-old who would never do this.
Certificate of recognition, maybe.
Yeah, inspire her to the future.
Yeah, and maybe a little press release to her local paper.
Yeah.
Bob, I have one observation I can make, really for the benefit of the new members. I had occasion a couple of weeks ago to look at a National Register district nomination in central Connecticut, property that is very much at risk now and in controversy. And I was startled at how superficial this document was. And just having reviewed now this wonderful collection of nominations, I have to say to the new members and to the staff as well, the level of the quality of the writing, the detail of the architectural descriptions, the breadth and depth of the statements of significance are breathtaking compared to at least this one, maybe unfortunately selected reading from the state of Connecticut. I think New York State has, once again, reason to be tremendously proud of the quality of the work that we put out, and this board gets to review.
Another great point.
Thank you, Lynn.
It's
On
terrific.
behalf of the union, thank you. You guys?
So, State Board, we're going to head in there for something to eat, and we're going to come right back because we still have 2 presentations and we have a training session. So we're not going to, often we break for lunch, but we are going to have a working lunch. But Tom, it gives you a chance to use the facilities and get something to eat. And we'll see you back here in a couple minutes.